through the Youth Fellows Grant and our new youth protection policy tonight. And this is our first August Academy for league leaders. We did a lot of surveying of leagues members this past year and really heard what people wanted was to be able to get more training. So we are trying to deliver on that. Especially in August, while it is summer, everyone is also kind of getting ready for voter service and new fall programming. So we want to help orient league leaders to your roles, but not to supplant any of your local leadership training or orientations. We just want to show you how to use LWVUS and LWVMN resources to their best advantage and encourage networking among you all and answer your questions. So tonight, our mission's quite straightforward, so we probably won't be here all that long, but I hope I can answer all your questions about two exciting things. I think they're both exciting. I'll try to convince you why youth protection policy is exciting. So we'll see how we'll move through that. But first of all, I'm going to open up our youth civic engagement. And so this is also on our website for those of you excuse me, who have been on some of our August academies. Everything today has been about orienting you to the fact that anything you could possibly want is on our website. In this case, our youth civic engagement page is right under what we do. But also, I want to point out every chance I get that under member resources, if you're ever looking for anything related to league, please go to local leagues and member resources. And there you will find probably almost every question you need to be answered somewhere, including where's that application for the Youth Civic Engagement Fellowship? It's under the applications heading. And so, so that we'll get to the application itself in a minute, but I want to talk first of all about what we're up to. The Youth Civic Engagement Program's in its third year, an initiative of the Schumer Family Fund and LWV Minnesota. And it's really been exciting to try to find a good way to get youth involvement with our local leagues. Rob, who's on our call today, Rob really approached us and said, hey, with his lifelong work in youth engagement, said it'd be great to have a way to better get youth voice involved in civic engagement, but certainly within voting registration, and advocacy as well. So we started what we call the Youth Civic Engagement Fellowship. And what this does is really merge the youth voice together also with our LWV needs. So as you've probably read, the students receive a $250 stipend for their participation in this program and a Youth Civic Engagement Fellowship certificate for use on their college applications. And we know that's important to them. But most importantly, they work with you all as local leagues to design and implement voter engagement projects within their local communities, like voter registration, pledge to vote events, and other projects you'll see below that I'll show you that creative youth are great at, that sometimes the rest of us are challenged by. So we're really excited about the support that we've gotten from Rob to help us through this. Our last group here, our 2020 fellows, of course, it was never, the year of 2020 will be a year we remember as a year lost, but we had a lot of fellows already lined up and they did outstanding work. We have several of their deliverables here on our webpage. So this is a real fun thing for you to look at. They made videos, they did lawn signs, and they even hosted their own conversation with Secretary Simon about youth voting. Did special newsletters. It's really amazing what projects the students came up with. And these all are examples of the kinds of things that students can do, but do with you, because I really value the students working together to see what civic engagement looks like for the long term. These students are all, high flyers going great places, but we want to show them by also attending our local league meetings that this is a lifelong journey. This just isn't a one-time thing. This is their whole life. And so by seeing all of you in action and civic engagement, really, I know is an inspiration to them to stay involved. So we've had some really good fun with the project. And we've also been really trying to work hard with to track all the different groups that work on youth civic engagement so we could do more coordination and collaboration. But as Rob could tell you, putting all the groups down on paper is much easier than it is to get coordination among all the groups. But the good news is there's lots of groups out there working with students, but not as many working with students on civic engagement, certainly, or with high school students. There's certainly far more out there with college students. So we feel kind of a neat niche. I'm going to put Rob on the spot just for a second. Rob, if you want to say just a couple things about your interest in youth and your experience in the program, and then we'll talk about the grant.
Okay, well, as somebody who's a little older, I have been involved in something called service learning movement for the last almost 50 years, and have been involved in democracy and getting young people involved in community-based learning. Actually, a long time ago, ran a school that my students spent 60% of their time in the community. So their civics class was all about working with legislators and working on community projects. Having said that, I have a book that you might be interested in. It's called The Future of Democracy. It's written by Peter Levine, who was the director of Circle, which is the best organizations at Tufts University, tracking youth voting and youth civic engagement. And basically what Peter says in his last part recommendation is preparing a new generation of active and responsible citizens. People form attitudes and habits related to civil society when they are young and keep them for the rest of their lives. And so if we're really concerned about strengthening democracy, we really need to start young. And we have lots of examples of young people who have really taken the lead. And if you actually go throughout history, you'll find that a lot of people, even in their teens, were leaders in making some kind of civic change. And so part of my motivation in terms of being older and not knowing how much longer I'm going to be around is to try to invest in programs like the League to support young people and to get young people involved. Because if you read Levine's book, he laments about how youth experiences have changed over the years, and they don't read newspapers much anymore. They get their information primarily through the internet. And they don't have opportunities to really be engaged in things. And so the whole purpose of trying to start the Fellows program is to have young people take the lead. Because when we get involved in voter registration, even in high schools in Dakota County, and I'm sure throughout most of your leagues, you do one-day activities at a high school or lunch, or you do something in the afternoon, whereas the kids are in these schools every single day. So they can hopefully make connections, and they can make connections with teachers and make it much more than just a one-day kind of activity. And so that was really the goal of the Fellows program, was to get young people to take the lead and to encourage and allow young people to get involved. If you're not aware, Minnesota led the country in youth voting at a whopping 47%. If you think 47% is really good, then you probably did really well in all of your classes. And so hopefully we can move above 50%, and we can get young people to be much more engaged, especially around issues that relate to them. I know you're going to have the topic related to the environment. I have a granddaughter and grandkids, many of you do, and have children. And we're concerned about the future, and that there may not be much of a future for young people if we don't take action on global climate change and those kinds of things. So I think the more we can engage kids around issues that are important to them, the more we can get them involved. And in some respects, the way we can strengthen the League of Women Voters. Because I don't know what your meetings look like, but there aren't very many young people at the meetings that we have, unless you define youth as anybody under 65.
That's what I
But
was going for.
our goal is really to try to reach that population of 15, 16, 18 to 25 and really get them involved. So I won't say any more. I think everybody has a basic sense of what we're trying to do. And the exciting thing is really getting to see the kids come alive and all the creative things that they can come up with to actually enroll kids.
Wonderful.
Michelle?
Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Rob. All right, so I want to walk through the grant now just to kind of talk about it. It's really very simple and straightforward here, but it helps to walk through the details of what we are offering. So I'm going to kind of just read this. Again, this is all on our website now. You can download this. But applications are open and we will be accepting them up until September 30th and awarded on a rolling basis as submitted no later than October 15th. So we give everyone a little grace as we go through the process. The grant is designed to support a fellow for the 21-22 school year through June of 2022. We've always been flexible. If there are certain situations, we're always flexible. The idea is to get kids involved, like Rob said. The Fellows Program is part of the Youth Civic Engagement Program, as we just talked about. Specifically, the Fellows Program seeks to encourage students of diverse backgrounds to participate in voter registration and get out the vote initiatives within their local communities in partnership with local LWVs. The program has a specific goal in 21-22 of reaching 50 new high schools across the state to register more students and to better include GOTV activities within all voter registration efforts. Youth fellows also learn about and fulfill an advocacy assignment as part of the 2022 Minnesota legislative session. So, just a few things about that. We really are going to encourage. Last year, we encouraged as well and got a lot. We had really reached a lot more high schools, but of course, they were all in lockdown. So we had very limited. It was certainly harder to get a hold of people, but we're also hoping that in addition to maybe working in the school that your student or students might be, that they might be willing to take up some other schools to help. So that's something we'll talk about. And we also want to not forget getting out the vote, as well as Rob said, a 47% participation is not so good. So we also want to do those. I know, Carolyn, as you said, is there a certain number of hours we expect the youth to devote to the program? There really isn't. Specific hours, but let's talk through that. A little bit more here, and I can address that. It's a good question. So the features include, we would partner with up to 10 leagues who can each have up to 2 high school students as your fellows. We have sometimes had people say, well, we have 3. Again, if depending on how many leagues apply and our funds available, if you have really great energized students who want to work on a project, we can probably help you out. It's nice to have 2 or more sometimes because they really do support each other, but 1 is fine as well. Fellows will each receive a $250 stipend plus a Youth Civic Engagement Fellow certificate upon completion of the program. And in our feedback with students, both of those were important. They really appreciated a little bit of funding, and they also really appreciated sort of that certificate that they could put on their resumes for college or school, college or work. Leagues will also be reimbursed for up to $250 to help with any direct costs at the local level. Last year, we just gave leagues $250, which is nice, but we also have several leagues that never used the money and actually just sort of returned it because they didn't have any expenses. So we'd really like to use our programs to fund the youth. But we're happy to reimburse you if there are, mileage or printing or, some certain things that you want to do, we can provide that funding. Again, if there's, an adjustment to be made, we're very open as well. Local leagues will also receive support throughout the program, including we'll have 3 training Zoom sessions for fellows, so we kind of keep them going throughout the year, assistance with promoting youth created projects, and other tools and resources to support youth voter registration and GOTV efforts. So what we've learned, this being our 3rd year and the 2 years we did this, is number one, local leagues really had ideas and students had ideas in their communities about what they wanted to do. So we really want to give you that flexibility, whether it's doing voter registration in the schools or it's some other doing these videos or signs. If there are certain things that are interested, we found that, we want to support that creativity. But we also want to give you some structure. So rather than just saying, here's your fellow, goodbye, you all are busy people. And so this way, that we will have these targeted training programs and we will help them also with our day of advocacy to participate in simple advocacy project as well, so that they can see the full breadth, with voting. If you care about certain issues, here's how you can get involved at the Capitol. Outcomes for the program include not only students register, but also we want to get students who pledge to vote. We have this great service and really it's well used and we have very few people ever sign off of it. It's called Youth Vote. If people text Youth Vote to 33222 on their cell phones, you get texts reminding you of key dates in the voting cycle. That's all it is. We don't get any cell numbers or solicit anyone, but it's a great GOTV tool to remind students, because that's another big reason young people just don't vote. They forget about all the dates and the times and, oh, wait, what was that again? So, and then all meetings, let's see, and required training orientations for the fellows program will be conducted as recorded Zoom meetings to make it convenient for our Greater Minnesota Leagues to attend. So basically the objectives then are simply to find a contact person in your local league, to recruit 1 or 2 high school youth that would want to participate. We ideally say it's best for sophomores or juniors because seniors, are getting ready to graduate, but seniors are great too, especially if we start at the beginning of the school year. It's good, but we do find that more interested are sophomores and juniors. Freshmen might be a little young, but there are some ambitious kids out there. And there's some just graduated seniors who are not yet in college that have been interested. So again, we're flexible on that. Plan and then implement and debrief your learning from, we say, a minimum of 3 activities or 1 longer term activity. It could be, the idea is if you're going to go along the year, maybe if you're going to do high school registration, for example, maybe try to do it twice. We want to push having not just one short-term project, but either 1 longer term or a couple of other activities you could do in partnership with your fellows that will increase the number of students registered to vote or pledging to vote. And then these are just some examples. And I think what's really great here is not just the learning of the students, but it really also is the learning of all of us as league leaders. Part of our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion is first of all, hanging out with people who don't look like us or think like us and spending, we have found there to be dramatically more students who register at a high school to vote when our league members are with students who understand and know the students and know how to reach out. So consider doing voter registrations, but also being willing to, let the student lead that. Also being able to maybe let us know, we'd love to adopt a few other neighborhood schools and figure out how we can work with them. I know Gretchen Sable from ABC's on here. I mean, there's no way, you have, I can't remember what the final count was. It's just like over 20 schools in your area alone. So we could help each other out here. And involve also your fellows in reaching out to high school clubs. This has been really successful. A lot of the schools now have social justice clubs, Black student unions, Key Club, National Honor Society, Hmong American Club. There's lots of clubs that could co-sponsor a voter registration or a pledge to vote event in a high school to make the what maybe was traditionally going into school, putting up our table, getting out our stuff. Like if we can really partner with the students and register to vote at some fun events, that's a really proven to be great activities. So plan that. We also are going to give you some contacts that we hope you can work with your Minnesota Youth Council representative or a youth and government group through your local YMCA. We will have those contacts for you when you're selected. Again, just we want to try to build more partnerships in our community, which are not just good for our youth, but good for you as local leagues to have those kinds of relationships.
Michelle, can I just
Yeah.
mention something?
Yeah.
An exciting thing has happened. Minnesota is the only state in the country that has a youth council that is elected statewide, and they represent the 8 congressional districts, and they have 4 at large, so there are 36 kids. This year is the first year, even though the program's been around since I think 2013, that the state legislature has funded them for $375,000 for 2 years. And they used to get like $125 stipend. Now their stipend is going to be significantly increased. And you can go to the Minnesota Alliance with Youth, which is the organization that runs the Youth Council, and you can actually look at your Senate district or your congressional district, and it'll list the 4 kids in the high schools that they're connected. So that's an easy way to help with the connection. The same with youth and government. If you go to the youth and government program in Minnesota, you'll find that they have listings of kids in high schools all over the state. And so those are kind of natural connections and a good place to recruit some of the kids, especially youth in government, where they don't get the stipend. So.
Thanks so much, Rob. And again, it's kind of a double whammy that we're in reaching out to some of these groups. We're also really acting on our DEI initiative to look at how we can be more inclusive in our community. So we will have those contacts and would work with you on that. Another idea is to plan a large event or be at a student assembly or rally to coincide with National Voter Registration Day. Of course, that's right at the top of the year, but there's lots of other days and ways to participate with students on site and campus. Increasing the number of students who traditionally register at current schools. We talked about that. Creating more deeper engagement with social studies teachers. Again, having a student involved with your local league. Now, you might have been doing voter registration at one school for years. If you have a student helping you, you will be amazed at how much further your registration efforts will go. And of course, there's also through next summer, even though this goes through kind of next school year, you can kind of trickle over into that next summer, right? And doing summer festivals, things like that. So there are many ideas, but those are some to get you started. And if anybody's lacking of ideas, we've got plenty more, so you could let us know. So there'll be 3 webinars again with your fellows. They'll be also will be recorded so that fellows can watch these if we can't attend those days. We're going to have 2 kickoff webinars that'll be the same thing. You attend one or the other. So people who are ready to go by September 14th could participate, or October 12th. We found 4 p.m. to be a good time. Now, there's never a good time for everybody, but it tends to be after school. A lot of people have a lot of things right after school, and so before the evening. So anyway, we've kind of tried to do these around 4 p.m. And there'll be also one in January and one in June, which will also be sort of a graduation ceremony. If we are together, which we weren't, usually Secretary Simon has been really gracious to host those in his office, and the students like that. So if that's possible, we would certainly do that. And we would certainly pay any expenses to Greater Minnesota students to participate in that. It would be great if we could get that to happen. We also really want you to have invite the fellows to at least 2 local league meetings during the 9-month period. We really want to showcase what it looks like to be involved in civic engagement, to learn, to present on their projects, and to observe how league meetings run. And then we have just a few metrics we ask you to keep track of. We have a simple survey form at the end. We've made this very simple. who's involved, what are you doing, and did you, participate, and what were your accomplishments, etc. So we make that very easy. The way the money and how it works then is fellows receive $150 at the start of the program once signatures from them and their parents are received on the grant agreement form and parent waiver, and then they get another $100 at the end. And again, local leagues can get up to $250 of reimbursement expenses. So, basically we're not tough graders here or anything. We just want to know that you've kind of got a plan and are good to go. We want to make this very simple for you. You'll see that the application itself, well, I'll come back to that. It's just a Google form. It's it won't take long at all. I've listed on the grant key dates, when things are due. And then we're going to talk, after we answer questions about the grant program, we'll talk a little bit then about the youth protection policy. We do have a new youth protection policy to protect the safety of youth and limit the liability of league volunteers working with youth under 18 years of age. So we do have an electronic waiver that parents and fellows will sign and volunteers sign. This is absolutely, as you know, very commonplace now, anytime we're working with youth. And I like to look at it really as an opportunity for there to just be an understanding of expectations and agreements between all the parties. I know some people have felt really like this is a big burden, but we really are simply meeting the standards that most programs have now for youth. I think it's especially important when we are dealing with diverse youth as well, because we're not all always educated in the various norms and differences of our students, and so communication can go sideways, right, just by lack of maybe uh, just misunderstandings. And so it's great to have a way that we can ensure to parents that we have vetted our volunteers, but good for you all to know too, and get some more information and education on the best ways of dealing with youth. So we'll talk a little bit more about the policy and the process for volunteers to complete that very minimal obligation of the background check, a little bit of training and waivers. So, but before we get to that lovely part of the policy, I want to answer any questions about the grant program itself. And there's a lot more on the grant program that just talks about, generally speaking, good stuff, how to be a good coordinator of the program, what our diversity, equity, and inclusion is, what our code of conduct is, and how to make the most of the fellowship. I also will just show you too the form itself, which is right on that page again. And thanks, Karen. I see your hand raised. So one second. It's very simple. Who are you? What are you doing? What can we do to support you? So it's really very simple. And so I want you to not be intimidated by this being a big grant program. All right. Karen Langston had a question. Hit it, Karen.
I'm wondering about the $250 stipend. I had assumed that $250 would go directly to the young person, as
Yes.
opposed to expenses connected to that.
So there's two sets of $250. So there's a $250 stipend for the student. Exactly, that goes directly to the student. We pay them $150 at the beginning of the program and then $100 at the end. But then we also have an additional $250 available for the leagues. Okay. To defray any costs, to help reimburse for any direct costs. So we don't want that to be, it's not all big money, but it's something to at least help support and provide for basic expenses and all of that. I see one question really quick on the chat is, when will we find out if our league is chosen? We will start we will start getting back to you within a week of your application after September. Let's see, so everything is due by the end of September, but we'll actually start evaluating applications in early, like after Labor Day. So we're going to try to get you going right away. We're not going to sort of like wait till the end, so that if people want to get started at the beginning of the school year, you'll know that you have that support. Kathy Peterson. Oh, you're muted, Kathy.
I have a couple questions, and maybe it's covered under the code of conduct. I'm not exactly sure, but is there an accountability factor in, since they are being paid a stipend? And the second is, are we covering, we just talked about being nonpartisan in social media. Is there a factor built into the webinars or whatever where these young folks are going to be told about what they can and cannot do?
Yes, so we will definitely, the social media training is part of that initial webinar. That's a big one, right? And so that is part of that initial training that we do. And we will give the 150 upon the start of the program. We've never asked for it back. We did have a few students who just kind of dropped off, didn't complete the final, really a project or the final metrics that we want, that didn't get their final payment. So there's a little accountability built in there too. But yeah, and I think if there's other, we have really been blessed in the last 2 years to have very little. I mean, we've just not had any issues, which has sort of shocked me. But we, the students who tend to apply for this are, kind of have it together, So, yeah, good question. All right. Any other questions before I go on to the child protection policy? Anything on the grant? I'm not seeing anything. When I'm sharing my screen, I can't see all of you. So just jump in if you didn't officially raise your hand.
I have a question. I did raise my hand, but I'm
Yeah.
probably not being seen. And it's Sudi and I in Duluth. A question about the COVID.
Yeah.
And in schools, any guidelines, will that come from the league, what we're allowed to do, or are we looking at for the schools to decide?
Yeah, so our policy from the beginning has been to follow the guidance of the governor. So I know when it comes to schools, there's some local control issues there, but in general, again, we all have been very, yes, we would follow whatever the rules of the governmental authority you're under. And we had, we were all, last year, there was no in-person anything. So, we really had to work by going through their online stuff, but students still did a lot. The video creation was really fun for them. I know some kids did some things like with TikTok and things like that, and, engage their, so I doubt that the way it's looking, I doubt we'll be in lockdown at the schools per se. Looks like there'll be mask wearing at the schools, but, and I guess the good news is there's also, there's certainly an opportunity for you all as league members to work with your students, to help them and mentor them and coach them, which is really what you're there for. They really value your input, but they're going to school every day and they're exposed in whatever way they are, so they can do the in-person stuff. It's not required or necessary that you as an adult attend things necessarily with them like that in those settings. So, and we'd be happy to help you if there's any special, like, I have no idea what to do here, because that's sort of what our last year and a half has been, a lot of figuring it out as we go.
I have another question about recruitment. For those of you that have been doing this for a while, how do you find your students? Do you go through teachers? Do you go through principal recommendations?
This is Colleen Feige from Edina, and we have had 2 fellows, and we actually worked with the teacher to kind of identify students that might be interested. And another thing I would say is everyone, and we're lucky, we only have one high school that we have to deal with, so that makes it easier. But to encourage you to develop a relationship between the league and somebody in the school administration, like our assistant principal, he calls us to say, can you folks register voters? And he'll talk with our Izzy Wagoner is our person. So making those connections really helps, to the point that Izzy suggested that we have a school board election in November, that we do a school board candidate meet or something. We're not calling it a forum, but at the high school, the assistant principal, and superintendent all agreed to it. So that's something that is a big win for us. But I would say start recruiting at, like government teachers and things like that. That might be a good place to start.
I think too, great ideas, Colleen. And if you really have most of you have probably worked in some schools and have some relationship with any schools. So I think that's, just starting out with the principal, but certainly I often find going to the counselors. Most of the counselors are all listed on their website, the school website. Go to the school counselors because they really know who some of those kids are that would maybe be interested in that. The principals get really busy oftentimes and don't return the emails. So I would try the counselors as well. And actually the government teachers do have their emails online. So, too. So cold emails are fine. But I think that also just sort of networking within, your group is just perfectly fine. I try to say it's sort of the keep it simple, principle of kind of looking at your circle. Can we make our circle bigger? And usually sometimes we'll have somebody who's sort of familiar with the league, but then they bring in a friend, and then that's a good way too. It would be nice to promote this. I mean, we've been challenged with the timing, to say to get into the schools and really promote it, certainly a sort of an equal basis, but it's always, we just aren't that big of a program where we have it, been able to kind of field all those applications, things like that. So it's still small, but mighty group and it's worked out well this way. Two questions. Is the grant completed by the league or by each youth? We have it completed by the league. The first year we had the students complete it and that was rough. So we have the league really take the lead on that and mobilizing their student. But again, if you don't have good ideas as to what we'll help you with that, but we do view it as sort of the league being the mentor, somebody in the league being that mentor for them. If there is a teacher or guidance counselor at school who's willing to help work with you on this, terrific. I mean, any relationships you can build are great.
Michelle, there's also the National Council for the Social Studies, NCSS. I believe it's just ncss.org, and then you can check the Minnesota chapter. But they would have a list of all of the social studies teachers who belong. And that's another good resource to identify teachers in the school.
What we've said too is really, as you see, kind of through October 15th, because for people who have really no idea or haven't recruited students before, you're going to find two things if you're going kind of on a cold call, is that most teachers aren't back to school yet, or they're getting close to being back to school. Then they're really focused on, just getting back to school. And so it kind of, then it's the first weeks of school. So getting attention can be tough. Sometimes. So we built in that wiggle room to try to, keep going throughout mid-October even to identify your program if you need to. I mean, when you fill out the grant, I should have mentioned this, when you fill out your grant proposal, you can say, we don't have any student yet lined up, but we want to do this. So that at least, that lets us know who we need to help, right? So filling out the grant form, which should be very, if you don't have an idea, but you just really want to do this, just fill it as much as you can, and we'll work with you. Okay. Okay. Any other questions on the grant program before let's see here, talk a little bit about the youth protection policy? And if other things come up, we'll still have time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our new youth protection policy. And this is really kind of getting up to the times. Most students, most schools and youth programs have adopted youth protection policy and procedures based on best practice guidelines for ensuring both the protection of youth as well as the volunteers who work with them. It's interesting. We had a lot of volunteers at the Minnesota History Center as part of our centennial work there. All of us had to do exactly what we're doing here, just to volunteer at the Minnesota History Center, because there's a lot of sensitive documents. And it hit me that I'm doing a background check and getting a letter of reference to protect documents. Why wouldn't we do the same to protect our kids? So, I think it's really, I'm really glad we're moving forward on this, but we're also trying to make it very convenient, hopefully, as I walk through kind of how this will work. So this document explains the practical application of the policy and procedures, which are really designed to create more intentional communication between youth parents / guardians, and adult volunteers without creating undue burden on all involved. The policy itself, when you read it, like all policies and things that are legal, they sound legal, and people, it's sort of like, oh, this sounds like a lot. So in this overview, I'm really boiling it down for you, what it really means. The policy you'll see, it refers to LWVMN staff, but that is a term for all staff and volunteers who are affected by the policy. So I, for example, would be staff. I intend that I will go through this procedure as well. So will league members as volunteers who are supervising youth under 18 years old. And we'll talk about who that looks like. So league volunteers who participate in our Youth Civic Engagement Fellows Program as a direct supervisor, as well as any other league-sponsored program for youth, will be required to follow the procedures. This would only apply to those volunteers who are supervising youth and carrying out a special league-sponsored program over a period of time. It does not apply where league volunteers are simply present with youth in a public setting for a one-time event, or a part of a program or event that is run by or sponsored by another organization. So, for example, it would not apply in these situations. If you're conducting voter registration at a high school and just going to a high school and students are around, that does not apply. You do not need to worry about this. Or leading a meeting or public event and their students are present, that's fine. You're just there. It's a public meeting. Students are there. This would be the same with the League of Women Voters meeting. If you're having meetings that are public meetings and students are present, you are not supervising them, okay? Or it also does not apply if you're sponsoring, an event and students attend. So let's say you're having an event, voter engagement event, and students just happen to be there. Another thing it wouldn't, so let's say, I know in the case today, I was thinking about Northfield Cannon Falls, where they work with a group in Northfield Cannon Falls to have students who are recruited to help sit on boards. They help students to learn to sit on boards. And then they have a couple of those students sitting on their local league board. But those students are really being trained and kind of brought in through a different organization. So if you're working with a different organization who is, bringing youth to you, you're not directly involved in bringing them in and supervising them. So I hope that makes sense. Now, it makes sense for the Youth Civic Engagement Program because that is our program. We're running it. We're recruiting people. Now, I know Bloomington, you have a lot of wonderful student participation. And, we can certainly talk with you and your league offline about when and where and how and who. But again, think about it like, let's say, if you have a lot of students just coming to meetings, And, if they're just in a public setting with you, that's fine. It's really when, hey, the two of us are going to go down, we're going to go to the farmer's market, we're going to do this together, we're going to do that together. It's really that direct supervisor relationship, okay, that we're looking to go through what it is. And I'll talk the application process to be a direct supervisor. So, I'll kind of run through all this and we'll stop and ask questions. So again, league volunteers who are identified in a direct capacity will receive an application at the start of the program. And then other league sponsored youth supervisors will contact the office to get their application. So it'll be a simple application, and it is a background check, which is done just once every 5 years. So it is just once every 5 years. Includes a brief interview, meaning me talking to you, and then 2 written references. We actually have the reference letters are all pre-written, and not pre-written, but it's a form, and lots of ways people can get the references and a quick call. We will pay for everything. There's no cost to the local leagues, their volunteers, or students, or anyone. LWVMN, actually, it costs about $19, I think, to complete the background check. I'll show you the company that we're planning to work with that works with hundreds of nonprofits around the country. And then there would be a brief training video really once every year about youth protection, updated best practices, and effective supervision of youth. So this would just be like a refresher. We're working on which videos are the best. This is a maximum of 30 minutes. It's probably more like 15, but it's really interesting. It's really about, it's all good information, and it's stuff that I realize, I was on a school board, of course, and then also I think I founded 4 booster clubs, and I've been in the schools a lot of the time. And even as I was going through this process and learning, I'm like, oh my gosh, I think of mistakes I made, just simple things that are really good to remember when we're with our youth, and how we work with them. And also, we have it being teens, things like sex trafficking, the kinds of things that are going on, the kind of risks our students have. For us to be another set of eyes and ears for anything that might be happening in their lives is another great service. It's not a huge thing, but there's just a lot of good things about getting that training. And then there'll be a liability waiver too that people sign, very standard, everywhere you go. That basically, again, limits the liability. Now, as volunteers, the one thing I really want to point out that was concerning for a variety of people, that really, you would be hard pressed to find a volunteer like our league members who just have such incidental contact with students to ever be, suffer a lot of liability. It's really the organizations themselves. As volunteers, there's a lot of protection, but it is good to remember those things and how important it is when we're with youth. And what we need to do. Obviously, as we've seen from our Catholic Church examples and our Boy Scout examples, adults can behave badly, and we are not exempt. I hope we are, and I'm sure we are, but we need to do what we can as well, right? So all youth and a parent or guardian also participate in a participation waiver. So they themselves will, basically acknowledge that they're accepting the risk of hanging out with league members. But I did want to say that on some of the things on the waiver itself, there are permissions. Like sometimes parents will say, I don't want you to use any of my kids' photos online. We're intentional about that, of putting that out there and saying if they don't, we can we can waive that on the waiver, for example. So the way that the actual signing of this goes, we kind of went back and forth, and we will make these electronic signatures. So they're online, people can read them and they can sign them. So we don't necessarily have to, especially with COVID-19, those things of electronic signatures. So it's not like you have to print it off and track it down and then get them to sign it. And then, I mean, I know all those hassles. So it'll be an electronic signature. And then I did want to show you too that this organization who will be conducting our background checks is really a great organization. They work with, I mean, they just work with everybody, including the Minnesota Council on Nonprofits and all kinds of major national groups in terms of providing ways to do the background check. We are going to do the simplest one, which is it's called Advanced, $19. So it's a social security number trace, DOJ sex offender, terrorist watch list. These you'll see right here what's included. So what will happen is that you, again, electronically, people just get a link. So let's say I pick Colleen Feige selected. Colleen says, yes, I'm the direct supervisor. Then we would send Colleen Feige a link to do her background check. It'll already be paid for. They'll just ask you, for your basic identity stuff, but you can see, I mean, Sterling, again, works with 5,000 organizations. So we feel confident with the data privacy here. And then there will also be, we would also send you a link to the waiver forms and to the recommendation information. So we'll get that all packaged up nicely. You can do it from your computer and you don't have to print paper out and all that. So we're trying to keep it very easy, but also really, kind of get with the 2022 standards here for our policies. So the policy itself, then this is the explanation, and then you can read all of this and the legalese and all of that. But it's good to read that. And the training and orientation, again, this is where I think you had asked Kathy too, we will remind people of the LWVMM code of conduct in our policy, educate you on best practices for preventing or spotting child abuse, and steps that would be taken if you were to spot anything. So it also, we have standards as a supervisor, as the state league, to let parents know about what we're doing, to always allow them to observe what we're doing, to be made aware of our methods and policies as well. There are, you'll see here, one of the things, some of the things under supervision, this would be in that little training piece we'll do where it says a minimum of 2 staff would be assigned to each program, operating site and vehicle when meeting in person. The way they said that is really, this was really if you're going to go somewhere like to a retreat or something like that. So we'll provide some, once we get this annotated on the end, because this won't start, the way we're doing this is we're rolling this out, answering questions. Then we will in September put all our get our forms together, and then it would start October 1st. So a lot of these things are really kind of targeted for younger children, but it all sort of works out, in terms of staff to youth ratios. These are hardly used here. Things like never releasing a minor to anyone, other than authorized parent guardian. Their waiver will say, I've authorized my child to be released to you. So a lot of these things get kind of taken care of through the waiver process, just so you know. So anyway, this is kind of how it goes. And as someone who's been involved in a lot of youth activities, this is really standard. I know it feels different when it's new and it's a lot of words, but it really also really protects you more to have that waiver in place as well. Okay, questions. That's a lot, I know. Let's see if there's any in the chat. a student can ride with one adult volunteer to a site. The thing that we really, I think this is probably the hardest piece here is it's just always best, right, to have two adults. Or, and an adult could also be another adult, like a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old or another older student. Whenever you have one person and one youth, it's one person's word against another person's word, right? So generally speaking, we really are, saying, I mean, I get it when we want to give a student a ride, right? But maybe what we want to do is give two students a ride. The idea is to try to not put yourself in any situation that compromises, a student, or it's as a sort of a protection method. I think what we're looking at is if you do this a lot, if there's a lot of one-on-one in there, just talk to me. And what we do is address it the way the attorney says in our waivers, where we would note, excuse me, been a long day here. What we would do is note in the parent waiver that there may be one person only present, so that they know that. So it's a lot of it is just like that intentional communication, but rather it's hard to like kind of make everything super detailed in every situation. So if you feel like, I mean, I know like in Bloomington where you have a like, oh, we're driving a lot of kids here and there and to and fro and this is happening, we can talk with you and see what you're thinking. We talked before about just driving generally, and driving generally is really well covered under our own volunteer policy, but also under car insurance. I mean, car insurance is the way that people are protected from accidents and safety and things like that. But when it comes to threats or possibility of sexual abuse or harassment, those are just things that we do want to be more careful about and may require some rethinking. Is there a way, for example, let's say one person's been picking up students for the board meeting. Well, how about you just pick up another adult for the board meeting first and then get the student, right? Things like that. It's just going to make life better for everybody if we can do our best to think about it from that standpoint of, what would be best for you as well as the student. Whew, lots there. Any other questions? I really feel sincere in saying, we really don't want this to be a deterrent to your participation in the program. It really, there's that one-time kind of startup piece of somebody having to get a background check and do the references, but we'll do all the work and pay the money on that side of it. So I hope you don't use that as a distraction. And I hope you also will agree with us that it's really incumbent upon us as adults to do everything we can, knowing best practices to keep our kids safe. And I think this is just something that is our world now. And I'm trying to look at it as more than just a legal mandate, but also an opportunity for all of us to learn and be more thoughtful in ways that we might be able to assist youth if they need help, or to prevent a situation that is uncomfortable for them just because we haven't thought about something for 40 years, or something. So, all right. Any other questions? So that kind of takes us to the end. Does anybody, I'm going to kind of stop my sharing and just see. If you don't have any other questions, I hope you'll apply. I hope you'll find good youth to participate. I hope, as I always say to Rob, I also hope you'll look to youth that aren't doing 10 other things. We do have a lot of high flyers that participate in these programs, but I would say sort of from my heart, I sort of hope to reach out to some of those kids that really care and want to do something, but maybe they don't have time. They're working a job too and doing this, and they don't have time for that, a big commitment to National Honor Society or this or that. So, kind of look for some of those kids that may, are excited about doing some new things and outgoing, want to get out there, but they don't all have to be the high flyers either. So. All right. Well, then, if we are no other questions, I thank you all for your interest and participation. I welcome any questions offline and hope to see your applications.
I was going to say the one
Oh, yeah.
ending on a positive note, the exciting thing about being in Minnesota is being in Minnesota. We have some of the best legislation and ways of registering to vote. Kids can actually register to vote online on their phones. And so it really does resonate with a lot of young people. They're just not aware of it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you again, Rob, for all your generous support of our kiddos and our program. We really appreciate it. All right. Good night, everyone.